All right. Well, welcome back to another J.R. Gladden Society member highlight video where we're going to be talking with members, trying to get us to get to know each other better. I'm Alvin Jones. I'm a pediatric orthopedic surgeon and I practice at Dayton Children's Hospital.
And my name is Jamil Kendall. I am a third-year resident at the Oregon Health and Sciences University out in Portland, Oregon. And today, I am happy to welcome to join us today Dr. Bobby Indu. He joins us from the University of Pennsylvania. He did his undergrad studies at Union College in New York, where he majored in biology and sociology. He then went to Yale University, where he completed both an MD and MBA and matched at Yale and stayed on board for his orthopedic surgery training. Dr. Endu went to Penn for a foot and ankle fellowship and stayed in Philly, where he has been serving as a foot and ankle attending for the past few years. He's currently at UPenn, serving as the foot and ankle fellowship director and on staff there. So thank you for joining us today, Dr. Andrew. We really do appreciate it.
How you doing, guys? Thank you for having me. Appreciate it.
Yes. So I'm going to give a little bit of background on you and how we came to find out about you. So it was just at the beginning of this, actually it was the May spring J.R. Gladden Society virtual meeting that you were talking to the membership about alternative ways of earning money in orthopedics. And, you know, I just thought that that was an amazing talk, and you had, you actually had some stuff on there for financial kind of planning. And I just thought like, wow, this guy's very, very savvy when it comes to finances, because some of the stuff that you knew about, I have some friends who I think are very financially savvy in medicine. And, you know, when it came to that IRA, LLC or checkbook, none of them had ever even heard of that. So I was like, okay, we got to get this guy in front of our members on these highlight videos and kind of talk some more, go in depth and kind of find out a little bit more about how you've gone down that path and of enlightenment, I guess. So tell me a little bit. So you have your MBA, right?
Mm-hmm. Yes.
And, you know, so one of my questions is, did you become more financially savvy because of that, or was it something that you were already like interested in and so that's why you pursued that? Give us a little background on that.
Sure. So it's a great question. The two kind of are exclusive from one another. Interestingly, my knowledge in personal finance and my personal finance education has come probably in the past 3 to 4 years, whereas my MBA was done, you know, over 10 years ago. So for me, the purpose of my obtaining the MBA was actually very much medically related and also not so. I have 2 older brothers who are serial entrepreneurs, and we had business ideas of things we wanted to do outside of medicine. And I'm the, you know, formally educated one. So in terms of that, my getting the MBA was more so about the business interests that I had with my brothers and some of our communal things that we were doing together. And the thing that happened though, when I was getting my MBA, I recognized that it's actually, an MBA is not really very much about personal finance. An MBA is more so about corporate finance or corporate structure, or understanding how to truly run a large business, if you will. But I will say it is an exceptionally versatile degree. I will say that in terms of obtaining it, it was probably one of the best decisions I ever made in my life. It cost me a whole lot. Don't get me wrong. There's not a lot of grant money out there for MBAs because they assume you're going to make money on the back end. But it changed the way that I look at the world. It changed the way that I make decisions, both in my personal life with finances, but just in my personal life in general. Because you start to get things like, you know, game theory or organizational behavior that are parts of the business education that apply well beyond business, that apply just to regular life negotiations and those sorts of things. So the point is simply that I guess my MBA was not related to my personal finance education. I don't think you have to have an MBA to become smart about personal finance. What stimulated my interest in learning more so about personal finance and understanding where to put my own individual money rather than my corporation's money was quite frankly taxes. When you become an attending, you enter a different sort of tax bracket than when you were as a resident or a medical student or even a fellow. And when you pay that tax bill after a couple of years, you start to realize there's got to be a better way. There's got to be something else that I can do, because there's no reason that, you know, close to half of my income should be going back to the government. And so that's what really spurred me to then start to look up, you know, all different resources on the internet, different personal finance books, different things specifically pointed towards physicians and their personal finance knowledge. And I became a voracious reader. I started reading everything I could get my hands on, from blogs to websites to books, and also having conversations. You will be surprised at how many of your colleagues are quite financially savvy or doing extracurricular financial investments that don't discuss it. Not because they don't want to or because they're trying to keep a secret, but it's just not the topic of conversation. It's not what you're talking about. So I started having these conversations with my colleagues in the surgical lounge, right, between cases. You know, hey, I heard you talking the other day about the real estate thing. Can you tell me a little bit more about that? Or, you know, I heard you the other day discussing crypto with so-and-so. Can you talk to me a little bit about that and kind of tell me what your feelings are on it and how you learned and what resources did you use? So I started opening myself up to learning as well from my colleagues, and not just relying on my own knowledge. I think it was, you heard me mention this the other night. I want to say I believe it was Henry Ford that mentioned, you know, this idea of, you know, rather than putting in 100% of my effort, I would rather have 1% of 100 people's efforts, right? So everybody does a little bit, and then that helps me grow so much more than just trying to do it all on my own. So that's where the majority of my financial personal knowledge came from. It was not the MBA. It was, and so you don't need an MBA. You definitely can do this on your own.
Okay.
And then, so, you know, were there specific, like, how did you figure out what resources to kind of use to guide you as you were learning about this?
Sure. So there's a lot of trial and error. There's going to be a lot of redundancy, meaning that you will, you know, read one thing from one source and then read a second source that pretty much echoes everything you just read from the first. And then to me, once I start to see a redundant issue, then to me that starts to be something real, right? As opposed to it being something that this one individual may be trying to hustle me on or may not have the full knowledge, and they were just, you know, putting out a blog because they wanted to put out a blog and, you know, get some clicks. I want to see it across multiple resources. And so I use a bunch of different ones. One of the main ones that I love, and I'm not here promoting anyone or anything like that by any means, but there's one called Physicians on Fire. And it's literally as it sounds. It's spelled Physicians on F-I-R-E, fire. And FIRE is this concept that was born probably in the past like 10 to 15 years of financial independence and retire early. And it's this idea of making good, smart, frugal financial decisions now so that you don't have to work until you're 65, so that you can retire in the number that's out there is usually something between 15 to 20 years after you start working. You now have the option to retire, which means if you continue to work, you're doing it simply as a hobby or because you really enjoy what you do, right? As opposed to it being an obligation. So Physicians on Fire, I think, is a great one because it's directed specifically towards people who are in our specialty, and it recognizes some of the special considerations of being a physician in terms of the training, the late start to earning any sort of income, the pressures of, you know, quote unquote, keeping up with the Joneses. Because for most of us, by the time that we start making any income, we're probably well into our 30s, where we've had friends who have been, you know, accumulating income since their 20s. So you feel like you're behind. So there comes this sort of pressure to keep up. And this, I think that site Physicians on Fire really does a great job of addressing some of those real specific concerns. Another reason I really like it, it links out to a bunch of other different ones. There's the passive income investor, there's passive MD income. There's a bunch of different ones and resources out there. So I would suggest for anyone who's interested, you literally just start with a simple Google search of, financial advice for physicians would be a wonderful place to start. And then you can kind of start to weed out what seems like a legitimate source versus, an advertisement.
I do want to really quickly just talk about what you just said there. When I was a medical student and even a resident, I was looking at, these attendings, and I was just like, they're always talking about money and not having enough money. Like, how can you not have enough money when you're making that much money? And it's so true. It's not how much you make, it's really how much you spend. And so you know, you do have to be careful and not get carried away, you know, because everybody wants, and it's funny, even me, you know, I was very resistant to that mentality. And I had my Honda Accord for several years, you know, in my attending, you know, career. But everybody's like, come on, Alvin, like, you know, you should have a BMW, you should have a Benz. And everybody is looking at you like, what are you doing, right? And there's like all these expectations that other people are putting on your money for you to be doing something, right? But all of that, you know, basically, if you spend more than you make, you're still like in that position of needing more money, living paycheck to paycheck. And so I do want to highlight that as just being one of the sound principles of being financially smart is keep your expenses down, you know? And so that's one of the basic things. But I also want to ask, and I'm gonna put a disclaimer out there for you, just so everybody knows, you're not a financial advisor. You know, you're not giving this legal financial advice, but you're just giving your personal experience. But give us some tips, you know, from early stage on to, you know, maybe later stage career.
Sure. But before I jump to that, I want to echo one point about what you said there. I would actually change what you said a little bit in terms of it's not how much you make, it's how much you keep.
Yeah.
Right?
Okay.
So, and the simplest way to put that, just a short example, someone shared this with me many years ago in one of those conversations in the lounge. If I make, you know, if I make $100,000 and you make $100,000, right? I go out and I spend $99,000 on frivolity, on everything else that I want out of life. And at the end of the day, I have $1,000 left in my bank account. You made $100,000 and you only spent 40 to be able to exist and live because you chose to be frugal about things and you chose to do the things that you needed, not just everything you wanted. So at the end of the year, you're sitting with $60,000 in your bank account. We make the same thing, but one of us is going to be a whole lot wealthier than the other in the long run.
Mm-hmm.
To answer the question that you did raise there in terms of, you know, points for different areas in your career, I would start from the time that you're a medical student, right? And I would tell you that when you're a medical student, it's real easy to get into all the loans because, you know, you're borrowing and you're going to have to borrow for medical school. It's an investment in the future. It's an investment in yourself. It makes absolute sense. But borrow within your means, right? You don't have to live in a luxury apartment when you're in medical school. Just because you're in medical school does not mean that you deserve to live like, you know, the rest of your classmates. Some of them are coming in without debt, or some of them have greater financial support than what you do. I lived above a restaurant, a little old Italian restaurant in a glorified studio apartment from the time I was a medical student all the way through residency in the same exact apartment. And my rent went up, I want to say, about $50 a month in my time there. And that was not because it was a luxury place. It was just simply because it was what fit my budget and allowed me to continue to save. The other thing I would tell you as a medical student is, like I said, keeping your debt in check. So that means the other outside expenses too, right? So when you're on vacation, you don't have to travel. You don't have to go across the country or anything like that. Then let's move up to when you're a resident. And I would tell you that when you're a resident, one of the first things I would do is set up your direct deposit into two separate accounts. I would take 80% of my income that goes into my checking account that I live on a regular basis. I pay out all my bills out of. That's my discretionary income, everything. And the other 20% goes into a savings account at a completely different bank. So that way, that money you rarely look at, you rarely see, and it just continues to build for you. Saving becomes a habit after a while. And so after about 6-7 months, when you go look at that account and you see that 20%'s been growing and growing pretty nice, you're going to be real hesitant to want to then take it out or spend it on splurge on something. You'll become addicted to watching that grow. The other reason that I put it in a completely separate bank is that creates a barrier. So it's very easy to get caught up in the idea of, oh, wow, they're having a sale on this, you know, wonderful, I'm going to make this up, set of rims for my car that I really, really want. I'm going to go buy them tomorrow. Well, guess what? If you have to transfer money from one bank to another bank, it takes about 2 to 3 days. And that barrier gives you time to pause and gives you time to think about whether this is truly a smart financial decision or just a desire and a frivolous want. Then I think those are, and then the other part I would say from a resident standpoint, your loans. by this point with your loans, they're likely going to be on some level of repayment. You may have an opportunity for forbearance or deferment. If you can defer them interest-free, great, then absolutely do that. But if there is interest accumulating on your loans, I understand you may not be able to pay the loans. I would argue that you should at least be making some level of payment towards the interest, because the interest will compound on you. And that's what takes your loans and balloons them from you being $100,000 in debt to suddenly being $400,000 in debt by the time you start paying as an attendant, because of the compound interest that occurs. So as much as you can pay down the interest during residency, at least try to do that, or keep it from accumulating to be too much. Those are simple things I would tell you as a resident. Now, jumping into when you're finished with residency, you have just been crowned a new attending, you're getting that first paycheck and it's starting to feel good. Like, you know, yeah, now I can buy the car, buy the house. Don't. Just that simple. I would tell you the number one thing is have a debt plan. So once you start making your true attendant, so leading up to you becoming an attendant, you've always been anticipating this great increase in income, this great increase in income that's about to happen for you. Now it's happened. So that means that once it's happened, there's not going to be many more significant great increases in income, right? So you really need to then start coming up with your financial plan based on where you are now. Rule number one, you have a ton of debt, way more than most of your colleagues or friends because of what you paid for college and medical school. You need to have a plan for that debt. How are you going to address that debt? Something along the order of, I recently heard the statistic that a Black college graduate is more likely to default on their student loans than a white dropout. I want you to think about that for a second. A Black college graduate is more likely to default on their student loans than a white dropout because of poor financial planning. And quite frankly, we know that as minorities, we don't make as much as our colleagues who are non-minority. That's just the statistics and the data that's out there. So if you know you're not making as much as the man next to you, as well as you know that your likelihood of financial crisis is greater than his, you should have a plan. So you need to have a plan to service your debt. And the simplest one is to start with, making sure that you're paying off the high interest stuff first. Anything above 8%, I would tell you need to bang out immediately or as quickly as possible. Because historically, the rate of growth on the stock market has been between 7 to 8% per annum, if you look at it over the course of 50 to 100 years. So that means if you have debt that's happening at greater than that, your debt is growing greater than your money can grow. And if that's the case, you need to knock that debt out first. So anything that's high interest debt, I would knock out absolutely first and concentrate on paying that. Avoid large purchases. Like I said, there's that impetus to want to go out and buy the Mercedes or buy the BMW or buy the house that you know what, this is right on the edge of what I can afford, but it's a beautiful home and it'll impress all my friends. Don't. Because again, those are poor financial decisions that can end up leading to your ruin. While you're busy just trying to make those payments on the house, guess what? You're defaulting on your loans. Or if you were doing income-based repayments on your loans, those payments are going to change and those payments are going to go up significantly, right? You didn't factor that in when you were buying that $1 million home. So again, hold off on making any large purchases until you're at least several months to a year in as an attending, and you now have a far better picture of what your financial situation looks like on a weekly, monthly basis. And then the other part I just kind of alluded to there too would be make sure that you're looking, all your different options for your student loan repayments, right? There's forbearance, deferment, income-based repayment. There's a bunch of different sort of ladders of repayment that are possible that they do not tell you about unless you ask. Bear in mind, the purpose of student loan companies are to make money and to make profit. If there are loan repayment options that will keep them from maximizing their profit, they will not offer those to you without you asking for them. It's not illegal, it's just unethical, but it's not illegal. Kind of sticking in that same early career part, we've alluded to this a little bit, avoiding the lifestyle inflation, and then save for your big ticket items. Don't put them on credit, right? To what Alvin was just talking about there, he was driving the Honda Accord for a few more years as an attending. While you're driving that Honda Accord, you can save $300 a month, which would have been what your car payment would be, until you have enough to buy the car outright. Right? Instead of then having to worry about payments or getting into debt behind that. Another quick savvy thing in terms of someone shared with me, never buy a brand new car, ever. I would just kind of tell you that now. You lose so much when you drive off the lot. You want to buy your car 2 to 3 years used, maybe it's CPO, so that you know that everything's working fine on it. CPO certified pre-owned, excuse me. So you know everything is working fine on it. Those are just some simple things. Another part now, this part gets really ignored when you're early in your career. Protect your future income. Now, most people, when I say that, will think about, oh, insurance. I'm not even getting to insurance yet. Protecting your future income, number one, means that you are excellent at what you do. Because if you're excellent at what you do, you get to keep your job. You get referrals from all over the place, and you get your practice to grow and expand. Advice shared with me when I was a resident in terms of your success as an attending. Your success as an attending will be based on the 3 A's, and in order of importance. The first A, your availability. Can people even find you? Are you at work and they call you? Can they reach you when they need you? Number 2, your affability. Do they like you? Do they enjoy working with you? Or is it very, very painful to reach out to you every time because you're just not a nice human being, or you're rude, or you're short with people? And then at number 3 comes your ability. So if they can't find you and they don't like you, they'll never be able to find out if you're any good, right? So you have to make sure that you're protecting your future income by being excellent at what you do so that that can grow. Being an orthopedic surgeon is the primary thing you do. So you have to make sure that you excel at your core competency. Now, in terms of protecting income as well, that's where the insurance stuff comes in. The one piece of advice that I would share from an insurance thing is getting own occupation disability. Own occupation disability is different from standard disability, and that it factors in the fact that you are a high net worth individual with high gross income. So the ceiling on an own occupation disability package is much greater than a standard disability package. Now, if you're doing things correctly and you're growing your finances correctly, eventually you become your own disability insurance. And what I mean by that is, remember, we've been talking about your saving and you've been growing and you've been having that sort of background growth of all of your monies. At some point, you don't need disability insurance anymore. So meaning when you're 45 or you're 50, you can now cancel all the insurances because you are financially free enough that if you were to stop working, you're good to go for the rest of your life. That's what disability is about, right? Is if you have to stop working for any issue or any problem, making sure that you will then still be cared for. If you've built up enough of a nest egg, you don't need the insurance anymore. So there's another payment out the door that you don't have to make anymore. So become your own insurance company by doing your own saving. Very simple concept. Last thing I would share for an early career physician, depending on whether you're W-2 or 1099, understand all your different investment options, all the different investment and retirement accounts that are out there, right? What's the difference between a 457 versus a 403 versus a 401k versus a SEP IRA? These are all different rules, all different tax treatments, and they matter which one you pick. And educating yourself on the differences between them can take literally 10 minutes. And so you can Google it and it comes right up what each of the differences are between them. But make sure you understand them so you're making the best decision for yourself, because the decisions you make now early in your career are going to dictate how you're going to live mid-career and late career. Okay. All right, so that's most of it there for the early career stuff.
That was a great rundown on really the finances and kind of how to look at them as you elevate through, your career. So I really thank you for that. And, like I was kind of mentioning before we got started, this time does go very quickly. So I do want to actually get an idea from you. Now I try to end all these interviews where we're asking our interviewee, what do you want to see more from the Gladden Orthopedic Society? How can we bring value to you as our members? And, really, what is it that you feel like we should be doing more of?
I think this exactly. And again, to that point that I made early on about 1% of 100 people's efforts, I don't think enough of us know each other. I don't think enough of us know each other well enough and understand the strengths and skills that we bring to the table. So while I may be good at finances, there are tons of things I'm terrible at and I'm not good at. And I would love to know, more about the membership and who's good at these things to make those connections and those resources. So I think stuff like this is excellent. I think this is what it is entirely about, for us to be able to support each other and learn from one another. Before we started this conversation, I was talking in depth with Jamil about his experience out in Oregon, just because I'm not familiar. I didn't know much about what goes on there and what happens. And it's eye-opening for me. And so I think that this is the greatest value we can provide, is the fostering of the relationships between each other and the growth that can provide for our personal lives, professional lives, and just socially. So yeah, I love this idea. And I would hope that anyone who does this is open to be reached out to by the membership, because I am. Anyone who wants to reach out to me to ask questions about stuff, I'm more than delighted to talk to you about it. If you're interested in fellowships, the Foot and Ankle Fellowship, I'm going to plug that here. Come on down to Penn. We're doing great things. But yeah, because I would love to be able to reach out to members. I know that you did one a few weeks ago with, I'm blanking on her name right now, Dr. Tanya. But nonetheless, the point simply being, like, stuff like that, I'd love to reach out to. When we did the Gladden Society meeting, I made connections with Dr. Cherie Sparks, who works over at Johnson & Johnson, with a couple of other physicians who are now going to be doing some consulting for Johnson & Johnson, just based on these connections, these relationships. This is the greatest thing we can provide for each other, so we're not alone.
And that's a shout out to the next video, which will be Dr. Cherie Sparks.
I swear I didn't know that. I'm not a show.
You got her lined up, yes. Well, thank you so much for giving your time and being open to do this. This is something new that the membership committee thought of, and so far, our interviewees have been super excited to come and be interviewed and share their experiences with us. So I thank you for being a part of this early. It's like the kind of the first few in the series of member highlight videos. So thank you so much for coming and sharing your experience with us today.
Happy to do it. And as I said, anyone who's interested and wants to learn more or wants to just hit me up for thoughts or whatever, feel free to email me. I would love to help. I think that it's great for us all to work together.
Awesome. Well, thank you again.